303 Tactical focuses on firearms training by use of the firearms fundamentals. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used as any legal advice or justification. Hey everybody, welcome to 303 Tactical. It's Jay here, talking about the firearm fundamentals. Today is our second podcast, and we have a special guest for you. I'll let you introduce herself. Mandy, go ahead and tell us about who you are.
I am Mandy Connell. I host the Mandy Connell Show on KOA News Radio here in Denver, heard via podcast and live all over the country from the iHeartRadio platform. And I am live noon to 3, Monday through Friday, Mountain Time. So there you go.
All right, Mandy, I appreciate you doing this. I'm going to try and not do a Jimmy Fallon interview where I ask you questions and then tell you how great you are before you get to answer those.
No, you can totally do that. That's fine. You can tell me how great I am. You can take the whole show and just make it about how great I am. I'm fine with that.
Well, I did pay for a paid subscription so we can keep going longer because you only get so many minutes. So on your free subscription. All right. Manny, well, I appreciate you coming on with us. I guess the first question I wanted to ask is how you got into shooting sports. I know you've talked a little bit about on your show during the daytime. How did you kind of come to get into that?
My father was an avid hunter for my entire childhood. I mean, hunting season was like, it was sacred in our household. And my mom to this day will complain about the fact that my dad, every Thanksgiving was gone he was bird hunting because that was usually the opening of either quail or dove season. So I grew up in a family where firearms were kind of a ubiquitous part of our household. And we learned to shoot at a very young age. The first time I remember shooting with my dad, I was about 6 years old. And I learned how to shoot his 28 gauge shotgun. And my father, I still shoot a 28 gauge when I shoot sporting clays, and everybody's like, what are you doing? It's super fun to shoot. We'll talk about that later. But I grew up in a rural community. So hunting was always a part of my life. Target shooting, where we'd go out to somebody's farm and set soda cans up on a log and then stand back and shoot various guns at that stuff. It just was a part of the fabric of our community and not unusual at all. And, when I was in high school back in the late 80s, I know I don't look that old, but I am. Our high school was one of those high schools where every truck had a gun rack in the back with a gun in it, and it was just that kind of environment. So it was one of those things that was just a part of our lives in a way that felt very seamless.
It's funny you mentioned that about high schools having gun racks. My dad used to tell me stories about how he would leave his bird gun in his locker at school and walk home, hunt rabbits on the way home.
What's funny about that is I remember like right before any season started, whether it was bird season or duck season or whatever, you would go out to the parking lot after school and there'd be a bunch of male teachers standing around a kid's pickup truck, and they would be looking at his shotgun or his new rifle or whatever it was he got that he brought to school so he could show all the teachers what firearm he was going out to hunt with. And they would talk about, how to do this or how to do that. I mean, it was such a natural thing that it never seemed weird to me at all. It was never controversial. It was never strange because it was so common. It was a shared experience.
Yeah, that is definitely not the case these days. And, no. I don't know if that's the migration of people from rural to urban, or I'm sure that has some part of it to do with it as well. You mentioned a little bit when you were talking about that. What is your favorite shooting sport? Is it target clays or
sporting clays is my favorite shooting sport. My father got to a point where he had some back issues and he wasn't in great, in the best physical health as he got older. And that, the schlepping through the woods to go quail hunting or sitting on the side of a field to go dove hunting was not really as appealing to him as it once was. So he started shooting sporting clays. He was probably in his early 60s when he started shooting sporting clays competitively. And he was immediately hooked and just went all in and shot in a lot of competitions and did really well for his age group until he said that his reflexes were no longer allowing him to beat the younger guys. And he'd get super mad about that. But he introduced me to the sport probably when I was in my early 20s, mid 20s. And I love it. I love shooting something that explodes, first of all. I do. I love seeing a clay pigeon like blast into a million pieces. That makes me
Always,
happy.
always a good time when something's
It,
blowing up.
it is. Well, this see, I don't like fireworks, right? I know that sounds
Right.
weird, but I'm one of those people. I just fireworks are lost on me. But I like making something blow up, right? If I could shoot the firework and then make it blow up, maybe it would be appealing. But I enjoy like seeing that boom and that immediate kind of rush of satisfaction that you get from it. And I found out later, I was actually competing in a sporting clays tournament for a radio station that I was working for back in the day. It was a celebrity pro am, and I was one of the celebrities. And I went back to my dad's range. He and a bunch of engineers from a corporation that lived down the street from his house in a rural area. They built a sporting clays range, and it was fabulous. And so I went there, and one of my dad's friends, a guy named Leo, and Leo was a former drill instructor for the Marines. And he said, Leo can, because my dad was a terrible teacher, right? And he knew this. He knew this. He could not teach his children how to do things. And I have found out genetically, I too am a terrible teacher. So, it's a thing in our family. But he said, Leo can help you get squared away. Leo's going to help you figure this out. So I worked with Leo for one day, and Leo said, I would rather work with women all day long because they listen. He said, men come into this, they already know everything, even though they know nothing because they're men. They're big and burly. But Leo helped me, and I won the women's division of that sporting clays shoot. And I'm just going to say that bar was really low. Okay. It was really low. So I don't want to make it seem like I shot, 89 out of 100 birds. I think I shot like 45 out of 100 and I still won. But after that, I was like, this is a fantastic sport. It's a sport that pretty much anyone can do.
Yeah.
You can have some physical infirmities and still be able to go out and compete. And if you enjoy shooting, but maybe you're past hunting, this is really the closest thing that gives you that sense of I'm shooting at something that is moving, that is less geometric than a skeet shooting setup.
Yeah.
If you know geometry, you can shoot skeet. Like
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. But the repetition of it is you can get it. But with sporting clays, every stand is different. The birds come out at a different, rate. So you have that kind of excitement of what it's like to try and hit a bird on the wing.
It's funny. Like you, I was introduced to hunting and stuff by my dad, and I found trap and skeet shooting very early because schlepping through the woods at 10 years old sucked.
Yeah.
So,
Wait,
so
I
I
got to
found
ask you a
trap.
question.
Go ahead.
Did you bird hunt with your dad? Did you go
I
bird hunting or
did.
was it just game hunting? Okay. When
Bird.
I was I'm like 10 years old, and my dad would take me bird hunting with all of his buddies. He had a farmer friend that would plant a peanut field specifically for dove season, right?
Yep.
And then he would release his hogs into the peanut field. They would uproot all of the peanuts and then get the hogs out, and then the birds would come. And
Yep.
so you'd sit on the edge of this field and you'd have to wait. And it was for a kid, that's awful. That's just fate worse than death, right?
It's
You're sitting there waiting. And my
it's
dad gave me
cold,
one
early, and
box of
miserable.
shells, right? I had one box of shells. And when I was done with shells, I was done hunting. That was how my controlled the chaos here. But my father would only let me shoot birds on the wing, meaning they had to be in flight. I couldn't
Yeah.
shoot them off of a tree limb. I couldn't shoot them off the fence post. I had to shoot them on the wing. So I never shot my limit. And all the other sons, right? The sons that were with all their dads, they would all shoot their limit and they'd come over and they'd be like, oh, you only shot 6 birds. And my dad would look at him and say, how many did you shoot on the wing, son? And they would just shut up. They would back up. I mean,
keep
my
on
dad
keep
was very much a sportsman hunter.
keep
He
on
he,
walking.
he
Yeah.
did not trophy hunt at all. Other than I have a Leah in Texas, which they're horrible and ugly, and really no one cares if you shoot those.
Right.
But he was very much about the sporting aspect of hunting, and I think that is something that is carried through for me in various parts of my life. I mean, it's just the notion that it needs to be as fair as possible.
Right. It's funny you talk about, sporting clays and it's that instant gratification. I've just started to introduce my daughter who's turning into a teenager, and we started shooting steel. Someone left some steel out on the range one day, and once she found steel, it's hard to get her to shoot paper again because it's that instant gratification, making that thing go ding.
Exactly. It is so much fun, and it's so it's just it's empowering to go out and shoot something and see it explode. And I have no desire to hunt. I'm too soft. Like if I was starving, I am. I'm fully. I admit it. The last time I went hunting with my dad, I was about 13 years old, and we were deer hunting. And I'm up in a deer stand. In Florida, the deer are tiny compared to how they are here, right? They're
Right.
like fraction of the size of the deer we have here. But I'm in this deer stand, and my dad's like 250 yards away in a different deer stand. And for Florida, a really big buck walks basically right under me. And I was like, there's no way I can kill this deer. And I shot into the ear, and my dad was so mad. He was so mad. That was it for me hunting with my dad. That was the last time. So it was, I
Yeah.
was just like, I just can't, if my family was starving, I could, but they're not. I can still go to King Supers, and feed them. So it's just not for me.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm more into the sporting aspect of it for sure, and teaching and training and stuff like that. Kind of where my lane has been carved. So, how often do you get to go shoot, whether it's target or sporting clays or?
Not as often as I would like. And I bought a new carry weapon a couple of years ago, and I've honestly barely shot it. And so that is one of those things that I have to make more time for. But man, shooting in this area where you have to go and pay someone to stand in a lane and shoot is expensive. And as I
Yeah.
mentioned, we used to go shoot in people's backyards because they had
Right.
the like farmland. So we didn't have to pay for that. But man, I realize I know enough range owners to know the built-in costs of owning a range are
Yeah.
significant. There's a lot of regulatory structure. There's a lot of stuff that has to be built into a range. So I get why it's so expensive, but dang, you're like, man, oh man, a Chevitz, that's a chunk of change plus ammunition being what it is. You
Yep.
don't necessarily want to go in there and blow a box of ammunition, but you got to keep
Yeah.
practicing.
Yeah. It's I went up to Wyoming with my wife, and she's from there, and she said, "Well, you make sure you bring some guns. We'll find some time to go shoot." I'm like, "Oh, really? Is there a range up there?" She's like, "Yeah, you turn left off the road." And nah, that's how it is. I'm glad you brought up buying a new carry gun. I was going to ask you that. When you go into these gun stores and you talk about a little earlier, men coming out and learning, it's much easier to teach women because they listen. Do you find it a little different when you try and buy a gun as a woman? Is in
I
the
had an experience at a gun store once where my husband and I went into the store together, and he's wandering around looking at stuff, and I'm wandering around looking at stuff. And I asked the guy behind the counter if I could look at a weapon in the case. And at this point, my husband Chuck walks up to stand next to me because he sees I'm going to look at something. And the guy pulls the weapon out of the case and puts it in front of Chuck so Chuck can look at it, and and literally directed the rest of the conversation to Chuck. And I just was like, you know what? I'm not shopping here. And I took my business elsewhere. It has gotten a lot better than it used to be. I mean, when I was younger, you'd be completely ignored, and they would assume you were shopping for a gift. It's like, oh, are you here to buy a holster for someone? Or are you here to buy ammo for someone, or whatever? And that was probably 20 years ago. Now it's gotten a lot more even as a lot more women have taken up shooting sports. But I tell my female friends, if you walk into a gun store and you feel people look through you, walk back out. Walk
yeah,
to it, give somebody else your business, because it's very frustrating when you're not being taken seriously, especially if you don't know anything about guns, right? If you're trying to go
right,
in and learn and find something that is going to be a reasonable carry weapon for you as a woman, if you have people behind the counter who don't even see you as a serious customer, it's horrible trying to find somebody that understands, okay, I don't want something bigger than my hand,
right.
or they'll try and sell you like a pea shooter because you're a woman, like a little tiny 22, because they're like, oh, I'm sure going to put this in your purse. That's terrible advice. First of all, you don't carry in your purse, you carry on your person. But you've got to go to a place where they take you seriously, they answer all of your questions, and they appreciate the fact that you're a new shooter who is coming in here to try and protect yourself. And there are lots of gun stores out there now that are really aware of that bias against women and are doing a much better job with treating women with respect when they come in and not being dismissive.
I was going to ask you if it was different when your husband showed up, but apparently you answered that. And
Oh yeah.
that's kind of why I started 303 Tactical. Especially when I was doing lots of training at police ranges and stuff, and as, like you said, it would happen a lot more with the female recruits when they come in. They went to the gun store and said, "Hey, I'm going to the police academy. I need X," and X turned into